This is Paul Schneiderman today, the 147th edition of the Sports Untold Podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio. My special guest today, I'm very excited to have on my show today, is Tom Glasgow. Tom is currently, I believe, an anchor and a reporter with the Seattle-based Root Sports. Tom covers the Kraken, the Mariners right now. Tom's had a very long career in the sports broadcasting field, which we'll talk about definitely in this podcast. Tom, I'll get back to you in a minute. I want to mention Olivia. Olivia is my assistant and producer. She's doing a great job. She just graduated from the University of Washington, and she's now looking at applying to law school. And as I mentioned to Tom a minute ago, she's very interested in working in the professional sports field one day. Known her family for years. My podcast, Another Housekeeping Matter, is now on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Google, iTunes, Podbean. You can go to sportsuntoldpodcast.net. And I encourage my listeners to click the like button, not the hate button regarding my show. And you can go and just by Googling YouTube, Sports Untold YouTube, you can watch some of my episodes. Before I forget, a friend of yours wanted me to say hello to you, Carlos Devalier.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So he sent me a message, wanted me to say hello to you.
Oh, nice.
So let me give a little background on Tom for the listeners. Tom's a very familiar voice and face in the Pacific Northwest sports landscape, but he's had a long career since 1981, working as a sports anchor, sports director, play-by-play announcer, reporter, and producer. Do I have it all right?
I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of different angles.
No doubt about it. Kind of a utility guy in the sports broadcasting field. Tom, back in the early 2000s, had a really major stint. For 2 years, he was the play-by-play announcer for the Vancouver Grizzlies in the NBA in their final 2 seasons of Vancouver. The franchise subsequently moved to Memphis. Definitely want to talk about that experience Tom had. Tom also has done play-by-play, I believe, for the Reign, Montana State, and PLU. Is that a few of the...
Both Reign teams, actually, the Seattle Reign National Women's Soccer League, the Seattle Reign from the old American Basketball League, the precursor to the WNBA, and the Montana State reference is really broader than that. We were, I think, for 9 seasons, Root Sports was the home of Big Sky Conference football. So yes, we carried a lot of Montana State games, a lot of Montana games as well. University of Montana, those were our primary teams, I would say, along with Eastern Washington. But it was a conference deal. So I don't want Bobcats fans and Grizzlies fans getting mad at me. They take their football very seriously in Big Sky Country, Paul.
Love it. Thanks for clarifying. Tom also is a member of the Tacoma Sports Hall of Fame. And
I am?
Yeah, that's a cool honor.
No, seriously, I've not heard.
I think you are, right?
Tahoma, my high school, Mount Tahoma Hall of Fame.
Okay.
Mount Tahoma High School Hall of Fame.
I think you're at the Tacoma Sports Museum. I'm sorry. I think you're
okay.
Okay, my bad. But maybe you'll be in there one day.
Like yours better, Paul.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Mount Tahoma, you're in the Mount Tahoma Hall of Fame. Okay. I always make some mistake every episode. So, but and Tom's been, Root Sports covering the Kraken and the Mariners in the recent years. And Tom, I really appreciate coming in the 147th edition of Sports Untold Podcast, also Rainier Avenue Radio.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It was nice to meet you recently at one Steve Kelly's birthday party. That was a blast. We had a short conversation. You were kind enough to invite me, so I'm happy to do it.
Well, I want to tell you something, Tom. I'm glad I stayed to the end because you were covering the Mariners that night. We wouldn't have met in person if I had left earlier. So the benefits of staying at a birthday party at the very end. I met Tom Glasgow, and you're on my show a couple weeks later. So
a blessing or a curse, depending upon your perspective.
Well, I don't think so. I'll take that risk. I saw you joking about it on Facebook. Tom, would you say, I'm going to start with this question. Was that the major, probably career highlight of your career, was being the Grizzlies announcer for 2 years?
As a kid, I was a massive Sonics fan growing up, right? And I'm sure there are a lot of us who believe that we were the biggest Sonics fan of all the fans. But that's how I felt. And I was one of those kids who grew up with a little realistic transistor radio, listening to Bob Blackburn when I couldn't see the team on TV. So once it was determined fairly early on I was not going to be a professional athlete, it was time to think about what were some of the options I could do to be involved in sports and sports broadcasting, Sonics. Bob was doing his thing. So I just kind of got hooked on that. Sorry about the dog. She never barks unless I'm doing a podcast with you, Paul. She'll be quiet.
Take it as a compliment. It was a compliment. Good.
Yeah, so that was great. It was interesting. So I had the package with CTV Sportsnet, the cable package in Canada. So for those 2 seasons when I did the games, it was 30 games each season. Don Poyer, who's another guy with local ties, Don was the radio play-by-play voice and also did some simulcasting on TV. So he was the true, at that time, voice of the Grizzlies, and I called the games on CTV Sportsnet.
That was definitely a major highlight in your career. I mean, being a play-by-play.
Absolutely. No, that was, look, I've had a lot of great jobs. That's sort of a byproduct of I'm now in my 43rd year in this market. But in terms of as a kid dreaming of something to do, it would certainly be NBA play-by-play.
No doubt, no doubt. It's a very small fraternity of
Yeah.
people are able to become major pro sports play-by-play broadcasters.
Yeah.
Tom, you kind of alluded to this. I believe you grew up in the Tacoma area, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, kind of tell us how you got the bug growing up as a young person that eventually led you to a long sports broadcasting career.
I just had a passion for sports, playing, watching. Obviously, fewer options back then than there are now. I was that kid that got home from school. I sat on the front porch waiting for the Tacoma News Tribune to get delivered so I could go to the sports section, look at all the numbers, right? Basketball season, you're looking at the box scores, you're getting your first look at them. Baseball season, probably knew more about baseball then than I do now in terms of stats because you were just absorbing all of that every day. And I knew really early on that this was what I wanted to do. And Seattle was where I wanted to do it. I never really had, aspirations to go to a national network because I love where I live. And so I've been very fortunate that I've been able to have the career that I've had in the same city. That's pretty rare. It takes a lot of people that look out for you at the same time, that believe in you as much as you believe in yourself.
Did you live in Vancouver those 2 years that you covered the Grizzlies?
No, I drove up. So here's how I usually go. At that time, I was full-time anchoring at what is now Root Sports, but was then Fox Sports Net Northwest, longest title in sports television history. So mornings of a game, if we were in Vancouver, I'd leave Seattle 9 o'clock. I'd get to what was then GM Place for a noon production meeting, go check into the hotel, head back down around 4 o'clock, do the game, stay overnight, leave around 9 in the morning, Vancouver, drive right back to Root, Fox Sports Net Northwest to work that day's shift. So,
wow.
Yeah. So look, it was a busy time. It was a great time. It was rewarding in a lot of different ways. I was able to, I'd use vacation days or sick days or whatever I needed to do to make it happen. So actually that 30-game package was a really good fit for me. The unfortunate part of the timing, of course, is that, even before I had done my first game, it was very clear that the franchise was going to be relocating. So it was bittersweet. I knew I'd have a fun time doing it, but it was sad because I knew it was going to be short because I really didn't have any desire to go to Memphis, Tennessee. So,
well, I'm going to ask you some more questions about your career with the Grizzlies, that part
yeah.
of your long career. And actually, I like to take questions from the audience. So we got a whole bunch of questions today from different people on Facebook.
Sure.
And one gentleman on Facebook wanted to mention something about your experience, as I mentioned earlier, being a broadcaster for Pacific Lutheran University. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience? That was your alma mater, I believe, as well. But I have a second question I want you to answer. I want you to tackle, Tom. Is covering high school in small college sports the same as pros? Because announcing is announcing, or is it kind of different? For example, is it more? Does a broadcaster have more of a license to be tougher on pro players, say, than high school or small college players?
I mean,
Just kind of tell us.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Look, and I will tell you, it's more the lower you go down in terms of level of competition, it's easier now because of the wealth of information available. But in the past, I mean, it was really hard to prepare for a high school basketball game. We would do state championship games, both football and basketball, en route, and you did not have stats all the time. And if you had the stats, you didn't know if they were accurate, and some of them were incomplete. You didn't have a pronunciation guide, and it was much more, from my perspective, labor intensive. I'd much rather, well, for a lot of reasons, I'd much rather call a major college football game at Husky Stadium, which I've experienced, versus doing a high school game. Generally speaking, in terms of criticism, yeah, for sure. Man, these are kids, college kids. At that time they weren't getting paid. Now they're starting to get paid. Some of them. I mean, people think that everybody in college is now cashing in. That's not the case for the PLUs and UPSs and Central Washington and Eastern. I mean, it's a different deal. So, and as far as criticizing pro athletes, look, I think criticism is warranted if you can see somebody is dogging it, not giving the effort. But I'll tell you, I learned a really important lesson early on in my career, Paul, and that was this. Everybody remembers Steve Largent, Hall of Fame wide receiver. Anything that came, in his direction, he would catch it, period, end of story, right? Elite. Well, at one point in his career, he had a game where he had like 2 or 3 drop passes. I mean, really, really unlike anything we'd seen. So post-game locker room, Kingdom, and of course, one of the first questions for Steve is like, "Wow, Steve, that was not you. You dropped a few passes today. What was going on?" And he said, "Well, I'm not going to make an excuse, but I will tell you that earlier this week, when we had our baby son, he was born with spina bifida. And so that has weighed heavily on our family, and obviously, understandably so. So what that told me was, and taught me, these are human beings as well. And we don't always know what's going on in their lives. And whether you're an attorney or a broadcaster or a professional athlete, things that people are not aware of can have an impact on you. So I've always been, I've been hesitant to, call somebody out without the necessary information, because you just simply may not know what's going on. Look, if a guy goes, look, Game 7 NBA Finals, Sonics Bullets, 1978. Dennis Johnson had a terrible game. He had a terrible game. He couldn't shoot. He couldn't hit anything. That's a fair criticism, but it's simply stating the fact.
Right.
Trash on somebody and dog on somebody if you don't have the proper information. You may be burying yourself when you think you're trying to bury someone else. That's how
a high school kid who misses, say, multiple shots, gonna be a little lighter on him when you're doing the broadcast and say an NBA player. That's just natural,
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, he's just a kid playing high school ball.
Exactly.
And for most kids playing high school ball, when high school is over, they're done.
Exactly.
They're done. They're playing rec ball, and they might have a better time doing that.
Right. Was covering PLU really a nice part of your career, being your alma mater and so forth?
Yeah, it was because I had a great relationship with Frosty Westering, who was the head football coach there, the basketball coach there at the time, another terrific guy, Bruce Harrelson. Interesting how I got that gig. So my final year at PLU was spring of '81. My final semester was spent as an intern at Cairo Radio and TV. So that's how they got to know me, and that's what eventually led to the job offer that I accepted and started working there not long after my college experience was over. And are you still there?
Absolutely.
Okay, something popped up on my screen.
No, I can hear you well and see you just fine. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, my apologies.
No problems.
Okay, I'll just keep talking. If you guys can see me, that's awesome.
See you great. Very good.
Okay, there we go. So the PLU play-by-play job opened up because a guy by the name of Steve Thomas left that job not long after I had joined Cairo. Steve came on board at Kairos, maybe a couple of years after. And so all of a sudden, the PLU opening is there. I applied for it. How did I give them a tape? I didn't have a tape. I'd never done play-by-play. So my brother had one of the first VCRs available at the time. So I date myself again. I had videotaped, I think it was a Seahawks Minnesota Vikings preseason game. And I did play-by-play to that game in my brother's bedroom into a cassette recorder.
Love it.
I sent it to Doug MacArthur, Art Popham, Clay Huntington, really radio icons in Tacoma at that time. Great, great people. And that got me the job. And I was on my way to my first $1 million, Paul. I was making $25 a game, no per diem, no gas money, and I couldn't have been more happy.
What a great start. Fun to work your alma mater. All right. So this is, I've never asked a person who's had a long career this kind of question. You know, I sometimes I brainstorm and my ADD-ish mind just comes up with questions. So, what is your favorite moment of your career in the 1980s? Let's do it by decade. What's the favorite moment of your career in the 1990s? What's your favorite moment of your career in the 2000s decade? What's your favorite moment of your career in the 2010s? And what's been your favorite moment of the career so far in the 2020s?
Okay.
You want to field that question?
Sure, I'll give it my best shot.
Give it your best. Let's do it by decade. Your favorite career moments in each by decade.
Okay. Well, I guess for me in the 80s, it would have been anything related to covering the Sonics. Because as a kid, they were by far my favorite team. I mean, I can go back. Again, I'll date myself. Bob Rule. I remember Bob Rule. I remember Lenny being traded. People wanted to burn this city down. And when he came back as a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Sonics were booed during the introductions. The Cavaliers were cheered. It was, in essence, a Cleveland home game. Cleveland won. Lenny Legend was a hero once again in Seattle. It was a great moment. So to cover the Sonics in the 80s out of school, that was great. But also during that time, I was doing the PLU football and basketball for 3 seasons. And that gave me my first on-air opportunity, right? Little small 5,000 watt station in Tacoma. Nobody's listening probably other than relatives who can't get to the kids' game. And that's only if they live close enough to the stadium. I mean, so it's not a 50,000 watt blowtorch radio station, but it gave me an opportunity to begin the process of doing things that I wanted to do down the line. And during that time, PLU played in 2 national championship football games at the NAIA level. So that was really cool to be involved in national championship games. So there was a couple of Final Fours, I think, in Seattle in the 80s.
Yeah.
So covered those. That was exciting. Okay, so we go to the 90s.
The 90s, yeah.
Well, look, I think it was the Glove and the Rain Man and Hersey Hawkins and Detlef and that crew and George Carl, such an entertaining group. You know, sometimes the things that stand out the most are the failures. And I'll never forget being at Key Arena, Game 5, Denver Nuggets. Sonics, of course, had won the first 2 games of that best of 5.
94,
yeah. Denver came back, forced a decisive Game 5. Kendall Gill with a late putback to send the game into overtime. And Denver ended up winning the series, taking the last 3 games. And going into that locker room to talk to those guys, having blown that series and lost a decisive game at home, was one of the quietest, most difficult experiences to go through in terms of post-game interviews.
Oh, I bet.
They were hurting. They were professional about it. Hersey Hawkins was always a go-to guy. Detlef was always really great. They stood there, they took the questions, but that was a tough one. That was a tough one. 2000. Okay, the 2000 to 2010. Gosh, this is tough, man. Let me think about it. Well, the Seahawks' first trip to the Super Bowl. I covered them up until the point of the Super Bowl. I had, unfortunately, my parents were ill, my mom in particular at that time. I couldn't afford to take time away from them to go to Detroit. Covered that one from Seattle. But I mean, that was such an important moment in, I think, not only Seahawks history, but the town's history. To have a team get to the Super Bowl, robbed as they may have been by the officiating that day, they still got there, and that was a great experience. 2010 to 2020,
20 teens, yeah.
20 teams. I mean, it would have been the back-to-back Super Bowls.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, was that both games? I enjoyed the first one, 48, much more than the second one, 49. I mean, to see what may have been the greatest single season defense in NFL history, absolutely manhandle what many believe to be the greatest offense in NFL history, to see it in person, to hear those Seahawks fans, to hear those 12s turn Giant Stadium into a de facto what would now be Lumen Field. I mean, it sounded like that, was off the charts. So that was awesome. Sickening to see how it went a year later in Phoenix with the I don't need to get into the
botch play, yeah.
So that was those really stood out. But also standing out that decade was the thievery of the Sonics and people who stabbed this community and Sonics fans in the back. As you can tell, I'm still bitter about it
I am too.
this day. So those were probably the three biggest stories off the top of my head from that time frame.
Dogs left in 08, but general era. And what's been the highlight
I'm sorry, you're right. Okay, I'll back up. I'll go, yes. So we'll move it back to that decade. I'm
But
sorry.
it definitely
I know exactly where I was, by the way, when that news broke. I was on vacation down at Sun River, and I read the story online, and I'm like, I don't care what anybody says, they're gone. And the reason they were gone was every member of that ownership was from Oklahoma City. And anybody who thought that Clay Bennett was genuine in his desire in that ownership group to make it work in Seattle, that, can I swear? Am I allowed to swear? That was bullshit. Total. And the fact that Howard Schultz was willing to sell out the city, that when he bought the team, he sounded so committed to. A lot of villains in that, all unforgivable. And anyway, there you go.
No, absolutely. Tom, something we have in common. I'm about a decade younger than you, but the Sox were a big part of my growing up too.
Yeah, thanks for rubbing that into, by the way, the age difference. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, so many family. Well, I'm a lot grayer than you are, so but anyhow. But no, that was a big part of my growing up, the Sonics, and a lot of family memories surrounded around the Sox. How about the 2020s? What's been the biggest highlight you've seen in sports in 2020 so far?
I think the arrival of the Kraken. Another major sports league coming to the town. I was so happy with that because there are so many people that have been so dedicated in the local hockey community who really wanted that for decades. Thunderbirds fans, Silver Tips fans, all the way back to the Seattle Totems. I mean, these people dreamt of the arrival of an NHL team. So especially for them, I just thought it was awesome. And it's still awesome. I know that they're coming off a disappointing season. I get all that. But, it was terrific.
I've enjoyed the Crack a lot too. Well, it's fun to go through these decades highlights with you. A lot of fun. Tom, when I met you, we had a chance to chat a little bit, and a name came up, and he has now been passed many years ago. Let him rest in peace, Wayne Cody. And a lot of people probably under 45 don't know who Wayne Cody is, but I grew up in the 70s and 80s listening to him. He was a real character. He one time did a Cairo news broadcast from a hot tub, and he had a show, Sports Line. And I believe you're a producer for Wayne Cody. Tell us about working with Wayne.
Yeah, that was my first job, was to produce his afternoon sports.
Yeah.
And then book guests, produce the Sports Line show. So how can I describe Wayne? He was the most unique character in local television, I think, ever. For folks that don't know, he was about 5'8" to 5'10", weighed north of 300 pounds. So he broke the mold in terms of what the expectations were for people on television, local news. There weren't a lot of people that looked like him. His parents were vaudevillians. So he was very much into the entertainment part of the business. I think he was a real leader in that regard. Not that he was attempting to be a leader, but that was it. He never let a fact get in the way of entertaining people. You mentioned the hot tub. They brought a live horse on stage one time. I think it was a week they were playing the Denver Broncos. Wayne had a beard. He shaved his. He had a barber come in and shave this beard off, which was monumental news in Seattle as he was doing the sports update. And there were a few nicks along the way and blood running down his face. I mean, he was willing to try almost anything. And then and there are a ton of stories. Anybody who worked with Wayne will have a ton of stories, and we've swapped stories. His memorial, certainly it was sad that he had passed, but there's probably never been in this area a more entertaining memorial service for anyone, because everybody had a Wayne Cody story.
Oh, I bet. Tom, there was a rap on Wayne years ago that he was definitely an entertainer, but his actual sports knowledge was probably pretty middle of the road. Is that a fair depiction of Wayne?
Yeah, I think it's fair, but I think he'd tell you the same thing. I mean, he never tried to sell himself as a sports expert, right? Now, that's not to say he was always sloppy or loose or didn't care. And, if a mistake was made, he wasn't pissed off about it. But his focus was always on the entertainment part. He was a phenomenal storyteller on and off the air. And that's just who he was. It's interesting because, Pete Gross, who was my boss, who was actually Wayne's boss. Pete was the head of the sports department. For folks that don't know, Pete Gross was the original voice.
I heard he was a great guy.
Yeah, tremendous guy. Couldn't have been more different. Pete was meticulous in his preparation. His cubicle was always nice and tidy. He was that separation is in the preparation kind of guy, right? He was, and yet despite their different styles, these two guys were the best of friends. It was really a fun thing to watch. Wayne was the swinging bachelor, right? Despite his girth, he had an appeal about him that attracted all kinds of people. Pete was married, 3 daughters, got up every morning early, swam, had a nice little lunch he brought from home, a very nicely made cut sandwich. Wayne was like sending me to the 7-Eleven across the street to get him big gulps and Coke chasers, and, eating unhealthy all the time. But I learned a lot from both, just by watching.
Great. I love this little walk back in Seattle sports history, Tom. Tom, these are 2 questions I've asked about every guest since about late 2019. And who is a living sports figure you would enjoy interviewing or spending some time with? And who's a deceased sports figure in history you would have loved to have had dinner with or interviewed?
That's a good question. Well, I've been fortunate. I guess your second question, probably Muhammad Ali. To your first question, I've been really fortunate. I don't feel like I've missed out on a ton of people, right? Like I've interviewed Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer and Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and Kareem and that whole Lakers crew and everybody that's come through Seattle. And maybe I never really.
You'd like to get deep with, if you could, I guess. Since you
Say that one more time.
Somebody you'd like to get a little deep with in a deep interview or conversation with that's still with us. Could be a sports executive, a manager, a player, a retired player. Somebody who's
probably because of what I do. I think there would be a handful of national sportscasters I'd like to sit down with. I'd probably start with Bob Costas. I'd really try. I love when he talks about. I think he kind of broke into the business calling ABA games in St. Louis.
Right.
So I think that would be a fun one to start with and get into. There may be others on,
Great name.
And Nance and all those crew and guys who have retired. Vern Lundquist I've always appreciated his work. I thought he was excellent at everything he did. And I know he just called his last Masters. So yeah, I'd probably go that one.
My next question was going to narrow it, but you kind of already answered the next question. Who's a deceased person sports broadcaster you would love to spend some time with, and who's a living sports broadcaster? You already mentioned Bob Costas, so you can stick with Costas on that one. Who's a deceased person in sports broadcast you would love to have spent some time with? Cassell, I don't know. I'm just throwing out some names.
Well, Cosell's great. I don't know if he would have given me the time.
He had a huge ego. Yeah.
How about Kurt Gowdy?
Kirk Gowdy. Yeah, good.
Gowdy was I mean, when he was at the top of his game, it was Major League Baseball, it was football. I mean, he did it all. But all the Al DeRogatis was an analyst. Don Criqui. I mean, I could riff off, a ton of names.
Sure.
Chris Schenkel. Lots of guys that you just as a kid, you just they did a lot of the events because there weren't streaming and ESPN and tons of these outlets, and it wasn't diluted down. They were the best of the best, and they did a lot of the stuff, and they were pretty awesome.
I love your first two answers. Lee's come up a lot of a deceased sports figure that my guests would have loved to spend some time with, and no one had mentioned Bob Costas yet. So I appreciate your contribution to those two questions.
I'm happy to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, you've had a long career in sports. You've been doing this for over 40 years. Can you tell us some reasons why some talented sports broadcasters have not had their careers go in the direction they wanted? What are some reasons some talented people just haven't quite got to where they want to go in your field?
Sure. Well, look, I don't think you can understate the importance of just being in the right place at the right time. And I mean, I know that doesn't just apply to this industry. I'm sure in your sphere of lawyers and legal pursuits, somebody meets somebody, the network begins, they get connected, that happens, you get an opportunity maybe you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. It's a very subjective business, right? So gosh, Paul, I'd love to think everybody thinks I'm the greatest thing that's ever happened, but I know that's not the case. So it's very subjective, right? It's not like a salesperson. Let's say I've sold Chevys for 10 years, and man, I've averaged 30 trucks and cars a month. I can walk over to the Ford dealership and I can say, I can sell your stuff too. Here it is in black and white. So there's that part of it. You can oftentimes get hired by one news director and put in a position. That news director leaves to take another job. Somebody else comes in and doesn't see you in the role that you see, or his predecessor or her predecessor saw. So much like a new coach comes in, and I don't want you starting. I want you coming off the bench. In fact, I don't like your game at all, really. I don't want you on this team. So, I mean, look, you watch great actors, whether it's Meryl Streep, Jack Nicholson, more contemporary actors, like Christian Bale. Are they phenomenal talents? Absolutely. Are there others who, before their careers took off, were as good or maybe even better, but just didn't get that one opportunity to launch? No doubt about it.
You see that in the sports broadcasting too. Yeah.
We'll never know who they are, but
timing's a big part of it as to why some broadcasters haven't quite reached where they want to go. Then
sure. Look, I'd like to think that I took advantage of opportunities when they came my way, but at the same time, I think anybody in my business would be foolish to think those who've had really accomplished long careers to think it was all just because they were so damn talented. That's nonsense. You have to have people that think you're good, advocate for you, and try to put you in positions to succeed. So it's never all about you. It's a collective effort. You have to be ready for the opportunity, but at the same time, you need help.
Great feedback. Just to sort of add on something, I sometimes enjoy going to the Act Theater, the Inman Theater, the Fifth Avenue Theater, some of our local theaters, and there's some terrific actors and actresses there. They're not Meryl Streeps or Al Pacinos or Christian Bale's, whatever, but there's some very good professionals that maybe didn't quite have that luck to maybe get that major role, as you kind of alluded to. Yeah.
So my wife's a casting director.
Oh, she is. Okay.
So she deals with actors. She teaches acting. She's been in
Okay.
business a long time. So she'll tell you. I mean, there's some really excellent people. Speaking of Seattle in this market, that look, Seattle in the '90s, man, it was a boom town for film and TV. There was a lot of stuff going on, so there were more opportunities for people to work. Well, guess what? That's not the case anymore. So it's tougher to be an actor to make it in Seattle, right? For a lot of people, they can be extremely talented, but that acting thing, just like that music thing, is a side hustle because they got to pay bills, so they got to do something else 9 to 5. So
Totally. Sure, your wife has a lot of insights as a cast director. So speaking of movies, I believe you were in a movie, Prefontaine, about the deceased great track star from Coos Bay, Oregon. I have some cousins from Coos Bay that knew Prefontaine. I think were you also in a TV show too?
TV show. I don't. I've done some commercials.
Okay.
I don't recall.
Acting in a TV show. There was some.
Oh, I was on The Wire. No, I wasn't on The Wire. No, I don't. I don't remember a TV show.
Okay.
But I was in Prefontaine.
Yeah, tell us about that experience.
That was, I think, 1997. My wife, the casting director, was casting the film. That helps, right? And but there were numerous roles for sports reporters. So I reached out to, mentioned Steve Kelly earlier. Steve was in it. Derek Johnson was in it. Dave Grosby, I think, was in it. Was Paul Sylvie in it? I can't remember. Anyway, a number of us at that time. It was a great experience. One day I got to have lunch with Ed O'Neill, of course, Married with Children and Modern Family. He was playing the assistant track coach at the University of Oregon. Of course, Jared Leto played Steve Prefontaine, and it was amazing how much he resembled Steve. And I'll tell you my most favorite story from that experience, Paul, was they were using the track and stadium at UPS in Tacoma as Hayward Field in Eugene. And by the way, the producers of this were the same guys that did Hoop Dreams, the documentary.
Right, Willie.
Steve James. So this I think was their first significant project after Hoop Dreams. And for those that haven't seen Hoop Dreams, it's a phenomenal documentary. Anyway, we're at UPS, and I am introduced to Steve Prefontaine's sister, not the actor portraying her, his sister. And I said, nice to meet you. And I said, how's it going? What's this like for you? And she goes, oh, it's great. And it's overwhelming. And I said, what'd you think the first time you saw Jared as your brother? And she goes, I broke down and I started to cry because it was as if I was seeing Steve again.
Wow.
And that's how much Jared looked like.
I'm going to get a little teary-eyed.
It was such a powerful moment. And just to have that brief exchange with her, to have lost him at such a young age, and now it was, let me do my math real quick, maybe 20 to 25 years later, and to feel like she had just a brief moment of a reconnect with her brother, even though she knew it wasn't him, but to have that feeling, amazing.
Powerful. Amazing. Wasn't there a second Prefontaine movie that came out about the same time?
About the same time. I think that one was called just Pre.
Okay.
I'm not sure. So here's the funny thing about this. So I still get money for that. So every 3 months I get a check from Disney, a residual check. So I don't know what Jared Leto gets, but he probably gets a nice check 4 times a year. My checks now, and they've steadily declined over the years because it's not being watched as much. I think my last residual check was like $2.31.
You
So,
I'll pay for a latte with that. Could be worse, right?
well, it might pay for the cup that the latte comes in, but that's a whole nother issue with the price gouging going on at Starbucks these days. But anyway, I digress.
Conversation. What was the other Prefontaine movie filmed at Husky Stadium? Do I have that right?
I don't want to say no. I do know that Prefontaine, the one that I was briefly involved in, they did use the University of Washington dormitory, I think it was McMahon Hall, as the dormitory from 72 in Munich.
Okay.
And the terrorists kidnapped and eventually murdered some of the Israeli athletes. So I do know at least that part of UW was used. I also shot my one direct scene with Jared Leto took place at West Seattle Stadium.
Okay. Okay.
And the scene was he had just set an NCAA record at some meet. And so I'm in front of Jared. I've got the microphone. I'm looking, my hair, I had more than, but my hair was a very 50-ish or 1970-ish look in the clothes and all that. And my line, Jared is basically saying, I go to him, I go, Steve, great race. What'd you think? And he's like, oh, I could have done better. It wasn't. I go, but you set an American record, and that was it. That was it.
Love it. What just so much fun. This may sound a little corny, but on Sports Untold, there's all sorts of sports stuff that comes up, and this is another example of it. Never thought we'd talk about the Prefontaine movie, but this is a lot of fun. Yeah. Other than Prefontaine, what is your favorite sports movie?
I don't know
Another
if
one of my questions.
One that's favorite. I loved Hoosiers.
Mm-hmm.
Loved Hoosiers. Slapshot was phenomenal. Field of Dreams gets me every time at the end. Trying to go way back.
Pride of the Yankees.
When it first came out, I loved Bad News Bears.
Oh yeah.
I haven't watched it forever, but when it first came out, I thought that was a lot of fun.
I had to mention Pride of the Yankees. I got my little Lou Gehrig picture here. So
phenomenal. Yeah.
A lot of fun. Okay, I want to talk a little more about the Vancouver Grizzlies. A gentleman, one of my Facebook friends, wanted me to ask you, do you think Vancouver could ever get a team back?
I would say it would be a while, because if the league, as we expect, expands to Las Vegas and Seattle, they probably wouldn't even consider another expansion until the end of the TV contracts they're about to announce. And I think those are probably going to be in if I read correctly, the 7 to 8 year range in duration. So I think look, what happened to Vancouver was, I think, so unfair. I'll get into that a little bit. What I was told the reasons why it didn't work there, but it did work in Toronto. But look, if it were me, I'd love to see Vancouver and Seattle come in. I could care less about Vegas. Not my favorite town. I know people like going, not my cup of tea. So I would love to see Vancouver come in. What I was told, the reason why it didn't work there and it did work in Toronto was twofold. One, the exchange rate at the time, and I know this applied to Toronto as well, but the exchange rate at the time was not favorable from this standpoint. All of the revenues coming into the Grizzlies were Canadian dollars, Canadian funds, but the money they paid out to the players, that was US currency. So they were getting crushed in that regard. Obviously, the product was really, really, really bad. I mean, they did not win much. We know that. No. So that didn't help. Despite that, I think the attendance was good considering what they had. And lastly, corporate sponsorship. So like New York, Toronto is the home of the majority, this is what I've been told, the majority of corporations, major corporations in Canada. So where are they buying suites? Where are they spending their advertising dollars? not way out west in Vancouver. They were dumping it into the Raptors and probably the Blue Jays. And so the money was very centralized in Canada, in that city, and not much got to the Grizzlies. That's how it was explained to me. And by the way, when they eventually ended up going to Memphis, I was told when that decision was made, it wasn't made because they felt like Memphis was going to be this hotbed of basketball. At the time, they viewed it as the best of a bunch of bad options. So there you have it. And I think David Stern was short-sighted. He was short-sighted. They should have found a way to bite the bullet, to make it work, because imagine the potential success that franchise could have had.
No doubt. It didn't seem like the Grizzlies owner at the time was exactly very forthcoming about his intentions.
Well, it was interesting because I had mentioned that before I even called my first game, I knew they were gone, right? So
Right.
I got the job the summer before my first season. The NBA had preseason league meetings that they were hosting in Vancouver that year. So we're all at the meetings when the news breaks that the team has been sold pending league approval. I apologize, I'm blanking on the name. It was from a gentleman in St. Louis. That deal fell apart. And then Michael Heisley, from a Chicago businessman, he came in and bought the team. And again, we kind of knew what was going to happen. We just didn't know where they were going to end up.
Gotcha. Was it hard being a rabid Sonics fan working for the Grizzlies? Did you feel a little dual loyalties at all?
No, not at all. In fact, the only disappointment besides the relocation of the franchise, which ended the gig, was I never got to do a game in Seattle.
Oh,
I did get to do one game involving the Sonics, but that was up in Vancouver. And I'll never forget, I was sitting out on the court. We were getting ready to do our pregame open, and Brent Berry walked behind me and just whispers in my ear, and he just goes, "Traitor." And he just kept on going.
yes.
So it was fun to call a Sonics game. I wish we had had a chance to do a game down here.
Okay. Well, Steve Killer, our mutual friend, wants to know if hosting Press Row has been the highlight of your career.
Yeah, for folks that don't know, that was if you've seen the sports reporters on ESPN. I don't even know if it's on anymore. It used to be a staple on Sunday mornings, and they'd have a moderator, and a few sports reporters would come together and they talk about the news in sports. So I thought it'd be fun to do a version of that here. It's we weren't reinventing the wheel, but I always felt there was enough going on in Seattle and the Northwest. We'd have plenty of stuff to talk about, which was the case. So often Steve was almost there every time. Laura Vesey, if people remember, was a columnist for the Seattle PI. Steve was with the Times. John McGrath, another columnist from the News Tribune in Tacoma. He was oftentimes the third person. I'd moderate, and off we'd go, and we'd put a 30-minute TV show together. We couldn't podcast at the time. The technology had not arrived.
Right. Good hearty sports debates with the aforementioned. Love it. You've had a run now at the Kraken. Feel free to tell us. So we see you on TV. Tell us kind of what your general duties are at the Kraken. So talk about that, but also comment on the firing of Dave Hakstol. Do you have any thoughts on the Kraken coach being fired after his third season?
Look, we all know when a team underachieves, right? You can't replace the entire team, so you go to the coach. I believe this. I think they made the decision from the standpoint of, they're leaving Root, they're going over to King and Kong and Amazon, and I felt like they maybe ran this scenario through their head. We're on new stations next season. What are we going to do if we've played 10 games and we've only won 2 or 3 or 4? Is that how we want to start on our new broadcast platforms, by firing our coach? So I think they made a tough decision to just do it and get it over with. And it's unfortunate, but I think Dave, and I don't know him super well other than the media to coach relationship.
Liked him?
No doubt he's disappointed. He didn't get stupid over the course of one off season. I mean, he was a finalist for Coach of the Year after season 2. You know, they go to 2 game sevens, win one. You know, they're a win away from the Western Conference Finals. He didn't leave that arena and bump his head and forget everything he knew about hockey. It's just how the business works. We're all, you know, at the time you and I are now talking, we don't know who the replacement will be, but I'm sure that's coming soon. And the other part of your question was my role.
Yeah.
Well,
and what's your role? What's your future role at the Kraken? What does it look like?
So my role the previous 3 years was hosting the pre and post game shows and intermissions. I did roughly half the games. Ross Fletcher did the other half. Loved every minute of it. Loved being in the arena. The Kraken have done a phenomenal job in terms of in-house entertainment. They've done, I think, to be honest, I think they're a model franchise when it comes to community involvement. Whether they're being compared to the other franchises in town, but in particular to other teams around the NHL. They're very forward thinking. They're very progressive. I have a lot of admiration for what they've done in that regard. I have no doubt they're committed to winning and wanting to build a winner. It's not easy. You know, we don't want championships for every Seattle team every year. It's never going to happen that way. And they're only 3 years in. So now, because they have left Root to go to King and Kong and Amazon, my 3 years may be it. To be determined, or maybe it's been determined and I just don't know. So if my 3 years were my only 3 years, I'm grateful. I had a blast. You know, we won Emmy Awards for the first 2 years for those shows. We may win another one about a week from now. 3 out of 3 would be phenomenal. If it's only 2 out of 3 with a nomination thrown in, that's great. We had a phenomenal producer, a guy named Scott Malone. Excellent. Everybody associated with that product at Root. I said this on the air after the last game, and anytime I get an opportunity to say it, I say it, Paul. The people you do not see behind the scenes at Root Sports are the epitome of professionalism, dedication, taking pride in their job, whether it's audio, editing, video, graphics. It is a great group of broadcast professionals. So that I want to make really clear. That Emmy is a collective team effort.
Congratulations, Emmy. Do you mind if I get 2 or 3 more questions and I'll let you
right
go?
There. There's mine, Paul.
Love it.
But my point is, I think collectively there were like 10 of us who got that award for a team effort.
Love it. That's a real honor in the broadcast TV field. Can I get 2 or 3 more questions in and let you go? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Good. Dave Hakstol. I never met Dave. I thought he did a terrific job that second year. Was there a little charisma deficit that Dave didn't quite have the charisma of, say, Pete Carroll? Did that play a role in the Kraken wanting to move on at all?
You know, maybe it did from the standpoint of when you're a new franchise and you're trying to market your brand. Look, nothing's more important than winning. Nothing.
Right.
I wouldn't exactly describe Don James as Mr. Electric.
Exactly. Thinking the same thing.
You want a lot. George Karl, however, George kind of had the whole package, right? He had winning teams. He had a lot to say. I loved going to Sonic practices during that time because after practice, we do our little media session with George, and then he would just sit there and just riff and talk, and he was funny, and he was great. So, look, there are different ways to get it done. There are different personalities that get it done. We're going to see a change from Pete Carroll to Mike McDonald, right? That's going to be different. Scott Service is different from Lou Piniella. It's, you know, they're individuals. Can I rule out that people, well, you know, Dave wasn't a great ambassador? I don't know that he wasn't. I think he was just dedicated to being a coach.
Right.
And if they had made the playoffs this year, I guarantee you, and this is not, I'm not questioning your question, I guarantee you wouldn't have posed that question because he'd still have his job, and we wouldn't think that was an issue.
Right.
Because they had a bad season. They got in an early hole they couldn't dig out of. I'm not saying he was the perfect coach. I'm not saying there were things that were missing. Clearly there were. But for me, the bulk of this season for the Kraken unlike the season before when a lot of guys had career years, a lot of guys that had really crappy years. That's just the reality of it. So,
To be fair, I guess my question would have been maybe perceived public charisma. Dave Haskell may be a very charismatic guy in private or in smaller group settings. That was kind of maybe a fair way of asking the question. But you're
no, look, I thought you asked it fairly. That was my
okay.
point. My point is, he just is who he is, but
Sure.
he's not Pete Carroll.
Right.
In this market,
Right.
a lot of people get compared to Pete Carroll.
Well, I want to throw out a comment. With a whole new hockey being introduced to Seattle East NHL, it was fun for me and a lot of fans, Tom, to see you, the long time local guy, showing up during Kraken games. It's kind of a comfort zone in a way, I think, for a lot of
I
fans
appreciate
that
that.
you had a long time Seattle Northwest guy were involved in the Kraken, and hopefully will continue to be involved. So I think that was fun. Caitlin Clark, a Seattle Times columnist, I think it's Matt Calkin, suggests that she will do for women's basketball what Tiger Woods has done for the sport of golf. Do you see some similarities?
That's a pretty lofty. That's a pretty high bar.
Yeah.
Look, she's phenomenal. Okay. But she needs time to adjust to the pro game, like most athletes in most sports, right? It takes time. So I'll be curious. I have no doubt she'll be a star and she'll get it done. Look at Kelsey Plum. Let's just take the person who she surpassed as the all-time leading scorer in college basketball that we were fortunate to watch here in Seattle at the UW. Kelsey Plum had a really difficult time adjusting to the WNBA. And now she's a member of a championship team. So I have no doubt Caitlin Clark will get there, but others are coming. Others are coming. It's completely unfair in a team sport to put it all on her to elevate the WNBA, because if her team's still winless, the shine's going to come off. You carry a sport by winning championships. Right? Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Shaq, Kobe. You can't carry a league or be the focal point of a league on a losing team. So give her time. Let's give her team some time. But she's got a lot to do to even have a career like Sue Bird had. Sue Bird had a phenomenal career. Not just in the WNBA. Look what she did in terms of Olympic gold medals.
True.
Phenomenal. But Caitlin hit it at the right time. And it's not that, and it's how she plays and it's how she shoots. She's broken a mold. So, I'm not saying I disagree with Matt, but look, Tiger, golf was pretty big with Arnold. Golf was pretty big with Jack. Tiger was the next one to kind of come along. He had a great rival. You need a rival, don't you, Paul? Magic had Larry. Larry had Magic. Michael had, Isaiah and the Pistons. You need rivals. So Caitlin's going to need a rival, like Tiger had Phil and others. But in the big difference for me with and I'm sorry I'm rambling on this, but it's really interesting.
No.
Tiger opened the door to the sport to a lot of people who had not been invited in. And that was significant. And we see kids of color who developed a passion for golf, which can be an extremely expensive sport for a lot of families. Black, white, doesn't matter. But he gave them a vision of what they potentially could be. So
yeah,
we can talk about that. You want to talk about we don't, but Tiger's imperfect, a lot of bad decisions along the way off the course, but in terms of his impact, people still wonder what he's doing in the second round of any tournament he might be playing, hoping that he'll be in play in the final round on Sunday.
We'll see. Well, today my mom's birthday, as I'm recording this podcast, May 23rd, 2024. My mother's birthday day. M's are in first place as we record this podcast. Do they absolutely need another bat to try to make the playoffs and advance the playoffs?
I would say yes, and here's the reason I say yes. Remember the 2001 Mariners?
Very well.
Great offensive team, right? 116 wins, seemingly had it all. When they got to the postseason, even that team didn't have enough offense. I think because of the pitching they have and the window they're in, you do anything and everything you can to give this team this year the best chance of winning. You can't always look to the future. You can't be, and look, when they made the trade for Luis Castillo, they gave up some real good young talent. But here's the thing about real good young minor league talent. We don't know if they're ever going to turn into something, but we knew Luis Castillo was already something. And if they go get a proven bat and they've got to give up some talent at the minor league level to get, or maybe an underachiever currently on the major league roster, do it. Go for it.
Go for
Show
it.
your fans. Show your fans you want it this year. Only worry about 2024, Paul. 2025 doesn't matter. 26, none of that. The only thing that matters is the here and now, and you have an opportunity. Look how much mileage the Mariners have gotten off of 1995. They win the World Series that year. The double. The comeback against the Yankees. They've gotten so much mileage off of that in so many ways. Imagine winning a World Series.
Incredible.
The short-term benefit and the long-term benefit to that. Go for it.
Tom, I want the Mariners, of course, to win the World Series, but I really want to at least first get there.
100%.
That's
if you get
let's
there,
get there.
If you're there, you might as well just go for it.
Let's get there and get greedy and win it later. Or
Yeah.
I want them to win it, of course. Well, Tom, this is going to be my final question or two. I want to know a little more what's in the future for Tom Glasgow, and tell us something you'd like to do, maybe your career and your life, as the years go on.
Well, as we talked about, again, I don't know if it'll happen. I've enjoyed the Kraken immensely. It's been great. We'll see how that plays out. I love the role I play at Root Sports with the Mariners. I'd like to, once or twice a season, I'm usually calling a Gonzaga game, filling in on that. That's great fun. I enjoy going over to the kennel and having the crazies right behind me. That's a very exciting environment. Look, Paul, I'll be honest with you, man. I am every day I take one big step closer to retirement. I'm at a point where I would only do things that I really enjoy doing. And I feel that way because I've loved what I've done. And as long as I can continue that, that's great. But when it's over, and I've had up to this point 43 years doing a ton of things I've loved to do. I've been extremely fortunate. I've met awesome people. I think from my perspective, my career has exceeded my expectations, so I'm grateful. We'll just see where it goes. Maybe I'll go get a law degree and I'll sit side by side with you, or maybe I'll just go into a life of crime and I'll have you represent.
Yeah, Glasgow and Schneiderman sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Hey, Tom, you know what? Bob Whitsitt was on my show a couple months ago. He went back to law school and got his law degree at age 65. Isn't that incredible?
I saw that.
Yeah, isn't that
Clearly
incredible?
much smarter than I am, as are most
No,
people.
but Bob went back and did it. So hey, there's all sorts of things can happen in different points in people's lives. Well, Tom, what a treat. Loved every minute of it. Great to meet you and have you come on Sports Untold. You've been on my guest list for a while, but when I met you in person, it was the timing worked out well. Back to timing as we talked about. But I'll have you say goodbye to Olivia, and thanks for coming on the podcast